Hi, this is Keith Townsend. Welcome back to my video blog. It's been a long time. You know what? A couple of weeks ago, someone pinged me and said, "Hey, we missed your channel." So, I've been pretty active over on our other channel for Virtualized Geek, kind of the technical version of my video blog, but I haven't really posted to this channel in months. And I'm coming back into the conversation at a pretty good time with this whole Richard Sherman, Seattle Seahawk, 49ers, track Crabtree outburst from the conference finals a couple of weeks ago. And it is a pretty interesting conversation. Richard Sherman took offense at being called a thug, which, if I was him, I'd take offense to being called a thug too. But more importantly, I think it highlights a pretty interesting part of our society that we kind of ignore a lot, and what happens when cultures clash. So Richard Sherman, obviously extremely bright person, 3.9 GPA at Stanford, and then obviously one of the best cornerbacks in the NFL, gets really excited after a football game and spews off. Whatever the reaction after his doing his interview is not really the focus of this conversation. It's more of the reaction of the reaction. It's interesting to see the dynamic when you have someone who's as interesting as Richard Sherman, who obviously is extremely bright, went to Stanford, but grew up in Compton, California. So, the culture, he made the comment, he knows thugs. A good portion of his probably childhood up until when he left for Stanford, a lot of his culture was based on kind of what he saw every day growing up in Compton. So what would be acceptable behavior in Compton is not necessarily acceptable behavior in the throes of the NFL and the halls of Stanford. I'm pretty sure there was some Stanford alum that kind of looked at Richard Sherman and was like, "Wow, you're representing our school like that?" And there were people from Compton that looked at Richard Sherman and was like, "Wow, man, you're representing Compton, and that's awesome." And I think that's the rub. When you have two completely different worlds coming together, and you're out there for 30 million people to see, it creates conflict. It creates disruption. You have a good portion of our society that'll look at his rant and say, "Oh man, the guy's classless. It was me first. It was nothing about the team. It was whatever." And then you have another portion of our society who sees nothing wrong with it. And the question is there a right or wrong? I'm going to lean toward there's not. I don't think there's a right or wrong about this. I think there's a bigger conversation about tolerance and understanding cultures and culturally what's accepted in one part of our American society and what's culturally acceptable in another part. There is not necessarily a right or wrong to it. Let's take another example. A baseball player, an American baseball player that goes to Japan and plays baseball in Japan, and the Japanese culture, things that he would do that would be considered, just part of the game for us, would possibly be considered disrespectful in the Japanese culture. Does that make it disrespectful? I don't necessarily. Maybe from that cultural lens, yes, it's disrespectful. But when you're talking it becomes a bigger question of what's American. So was Richard Sherman's reaction un-American? So for those of us who view his rant as, and I guess the I'm showing my bias when I say it's a rant, but he did yell. But I think that's a great leeway to. There's those of us in society who looked at his rant or his outburst as a rant, and there's some of us that looked at it as, that's just the everyday part of life, and there's nothing wrong with it. The emotion was fine, and even the words that he used in his reaction was fine. So it brings about a bigger conversation about how do we adapt? How do we become much more accepting, especially in this world of Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, social media, 24-hour news? How do we learn to really integrate and become a more cohesive society and setting standards that's I don't know if we can set standards that's for these types of interactions that's okay across the board, or we just need to learn how to accept and deal with them. So you know what? That's this episode of my video blog. You want to learn more about me? You can follow me at Chuck Balkin on Twitter, or you can visit my personal blog, keithtownsend.co. Talk to you guys next video installment.